across Virginia about how the one thing that everybody says they agree on is that we should teach all of our history, the good, bad, and ugly. And so I will try to give you a good, bad, and ugly history of the last 3 months in Virginia politics. I think, of course, that starts with the biggest hot button topic of this General Assembly session, which was education. And as an educator myself, I would always love our attention to be on schools and teachers and how to serve all of them well, but not with this attitude. So let me start with a little bit of good news about some productive steps that I think we took to support our schools going forward. The good news is that we passed a really productive bipartisan bill called the Virginia Literacy Act, which will create a framework for better providing reading specialists in grades K through 3 all across Virginia and setting standards to make sure that all of our school districts have those positions. Literacy skills were always fundamental before COVID, but now we have so many of our youngest learners who are catching up on those essential language formation skills, which are some of the hardest things to teach by Zoom. And so work was sort of overdue, but it's really urgent now. And I think it's great to see that we had legislators from both parties and both chambers come together on that. I think we also had a wonderful bill that was carried by Delegate Van Valkenburg, who's one of the teachers we have in the House and a dear friend of mine, that is going to reform the way we do standards of learning assessments in middle and high school for social studies and for science, to make those less about bubble tests and more about free response questions and demonstrating analytic skills, because we know that that's how you actually exercise an understanding of history and science out in the real world. And so I think those are productive steps. For me, the really bad news that came out of this session is that we weren't making enough progress on some of the most critical needs that our schools face. In my district in particular, and I imagine maybe here as well, one of those is school construction and renovation. We have schools that are terribly overcrowded with students studying in trailers that were supposed to be replaced ages ago. Our school has major accommodations that need to be made to meet the Americans with Disabilities Act still. And so we don't have a gymnasium, for example, that kids in a wheelchair can get in and out of. We've got a leaky roof in our gym. So when it rains, we've got real problems there in our middle school. And I know that Charlottesville City is not alone. We've got a lot of schools that were built in the 60s or beforehand and haven't been updated since. More than half of Virginia schools are at capacity or overcrowded, and nearly half of them are more than 50 years old. And so there's districts all across the Commonwealth that deeply need either new construction because they've been growing, or renovations of old buildings. And we thought we had a really positive bipartisan step toward that. During the last session, Senator McClellan carried a bill that created a bipartisan school construction commission that met over the last year and developed a suite of bipartisan proposals for how to address this, because this is a problem in deep blue places like Richmond and in deep red places in Southside and Southwest. And so it was something where we could get legislators to come together. And they estimated that the scale of that problem is on the order of 25 billion with a B dollars. And so I think it's really important to think about how big that is every time we hear about Richmond wanting to cut taxes or claiming victory when they put $500 million toward the problem, because this is a billion with a B kind of problem, many of them. And I'm sorry to say that a lot of the recommendations that came out of that commission were dead on the water in the House, dead in the water in the House. Even just some basic things like setting standards of maintenance, so that we could have a common yardstick for saying this school is making the grade and this school district is falling short and needs support. So that, for my district at least, that was a really big bad thing to come out of it, is the unwillingness of the General Assembly to invest in schools and also in the standards of quality for staffing, for teachers, and all of the people who power our schools. And then there's the ugly, which I think is where we spent most of our energy on education, the bills that we're aiming to restrict what can be taught in our schools and ensure that students get a complete and nuanced picture of everything from history to English to science in some cases. And I think, heartened to say that all of those bills were dead on arrival in the Senate. So in some ways, the education policy that got the most oxygen was full of sound and fury signifying nothing. None of it's going to become law. I am not concerned that any of the bills that passed and are going to be on the books of our state code that would have meaningfully restricted curricula in Virginia, those bills did not pass. So that doesn't mean, I think, in any sense that the crisis that we're facing in education around diversity and inclusion is over. In particular, I hear from teachers all the time in our district this very serious chilling effect that has on their confidence to broach sensitive topics, which is what they're there to do. Our schools are all about teaching students the skills to grapple with challenging material together. That's the whole reason we believe in public education, is we think if we're going to grow up to be adults who know how to live together and get along, then as children, we're going to have to learn how to talk about all the things that make us different and hone the skills of those kinds of discussions. And so what makes me most nervous is that in the absence of legislative action, what the administration is doing is using the only levers they have to restrict curricula, which is removing resources that had been established during the governor's administration to support curricula for teachers around the state. And that's especially important for our smaller school districts that may not have the resources to develop those on their own. They're really leaning on the state guidelines around here are model lessons for Black History Month. Here are model lessons on Asian history or women's history. They need those shared resources because they can't develop them their own. So that's sort of the big rundown, I think, on education, good, bad, and ugly. We also didn't, I know there was a lot of talk about charter schools and lab schools. The most big picture measures on that also didn't make much progress. There is one still underway that we're trying to hammer out in the special session that is a very pared down bill on lab schools, which are schools done in conjunction with a university that has a teacher education program. It's not clear where that bill's gonna land, but the most important piece of it from my perspective is that the Senate has made clear that the only bills they're willing to consider around charter and lab schools are ones that rightly include the supervision of a local school board. There's no situation where we're going to have a big state authorizer that can come in and pump charter schools into a community without the consent of their duly elected local officials. And I think that's the important part. We have a charter school in Albemarle County where I serve, which is one of just 7, I think, in Virginia. We call it the Community Lab School. It's got partnerships with UVA. It does a lot of innovative curricula stuff, and it's a really wonderful part of our community as an option, but it's under the supervision of our local school division and meets a lot of the same local standards around staffing and licensure and things. So I think there is a scope for some charter schools in some communities if the communities want to embrace them and have the right to do oversight over them, just like other schools. So that's sort of education. I think the other thing that always is top of mind for me and in the legislature is healthcare, because that's the second biggest slice of the state budget. I think that we did some good work on that to make permanent some of the important flexibility measures that we enacted during the pandemic around telehealth, for example, which has been really important in a lot of communities. It's been really important, especially for patients with mobility issues, for patients with developmental disabilities, that they can sit at home in a safe, comfortable place and still get the care that they need, or have a consultation with a physician. So I'm glad that we have learned some things about how to make healthcare more flexible and distributed, and that we're able to make those things permanent for the long haul. I think that the bad of the session on healthcare is the same, which is that we have kicked the can down the road again on the most long neglected needs in healthcare, which again are really about funding and staffing standards. And whether we're talking about the Medicaid waiver list for developmental disabilities or nursing homes, which are understaffed, there's not a healthcare provider in our community who I don't hear from all the time that says our state's Medicaid reimbursement rates are too low to allow them to pay providers to cover all the patients that they need to serve. And that's true whether you're talking about dental care or you're talking about home health care aides. All of them in particular need more support and the pay they need to be treated like the professionals they are for some of the hardest work you can really do. The ugly on healthcare, I think it's the bills that have come out of the medical freedom movement. which include bills about ivermectin, which again died in the Senate, and bills around restricting vaccine access, or bills that again were just largely symbolic around vaccine mandates, none of which were ever implemented in Virginia, but that doesn't mean that you can't bang the drum. Again, all of those bills died. I think the most important measures that died from a healthcare perspective are the ones that would have restricted abortion access for women. I used to work at Planned Parenthood, so this is work that is real near and dear to my heart. The bills that would have meaningfully restricted access to reproductive care also died in the Senate, which was not a guarantee. The Senate is very evenly split on choice issues because there is one Democrat who is anti-choice in the Senate. And in particular, where I take heart on the work on abortion is that the most aggressive bills, the ones that mirror what we're seeing in Texas and Missouri and Oklahoma, didn't even come up for a vote. The House Republicans were not willing to docket for a vote the Texas-style abortion ban because they knew it would die in the Senate, and they didn't want their members on the record on that because they know that in swing districts, that is not a popular stance to take. And so I choose to take heart in that news, that it shows that they understand that abortion rights are essential and that opposing them is politically unpopular in Virginia. And we managed to even winnow down some of the bills that would have reinstated restrictions from the last decade, trap laws and mandatory ultrasounds. Those bills didn't even get out of the House either. So in the long arc of this, we are winning the war of popular opinion in making clear that everybody's got the right to make decisions about their own body. And I think that, you know, for folks who've been working on that for longer than I've been alive, that's really welcome news. So that's sort of where I think we're at on healthcare. I guess since you brought up background in clean energy, maybe I can talk about that as well. You know, I'm sorry to say this is the one where I think it's hardest to have good news to report, because now that we're back to having a Republican majority in the House, it's hard to make progress because this is just not something that they're invested in. None of the bills that would have made proactive progress on clean energy investment, whether it's in our transit systems or in our building construction or in utility scale solar and wind, none of those made progress. And I think that speaks to the state of the General Assembly right now. We can bat down the bad stuff, but the really good stuff is stuck again until we get back the House. I think that we managed to knock down most of the bad bills, ones that would have given natural gas companies an unfair advantage against cities that are trying to wean themselves off of fossil fuels. And we managed to kill in the Senate all of the bills that would have rolled back progress on the Clean Energy Act or the Clean Car Standards. Those were defeated as well. But it's, you know, it's really frustrating when you're talking about a problem where there's no such thing as moving too fast, that we are now in Virginia sort of stuck in limbo on trying to make clean energy investments. I guess if I can be optimistic, the one piece of meaningful compromise on clean energy that I think is probably especially relevant in communities like this one is a bill that brought the land conservation and solar industry together around creating a plan for the next 3 years to identify the sites in Virginia that are most amenable to solar so that we can do a better job as a Commonwealth of prioritizing projects in places where they're likely to do the least to disrupt really valuable natural resources land. So on brownfields and abandoned coal sites and places where there isn't as much natural beauty to destroy. And I think that's essential work for building a long-term durable coalition around solar, because I know that there's lots of people who like clean energy in the abstract, but when it shows up in their view shed, it's not exactly welcome.
So you said that's progressing?
That bill was carried initially by Senator Weber, or excuse me, Delegate Weber. If you were to hop on LIS, you could look at the bills that he carried. I confess off the top, I'm forgetting what the number was. Weber, yeah. He serves in Fauquier. Okay, so that's sort of the highlights from my perspective.
How about the budget situation?
That's where we are now. Great segue. So that's the work that we finished. The work that is left unfinished is the budget. And that's not unusual. It's not unusual that the General Assembly goes into overtime on the budget. I think that everybody is now coming to terms with the fact that Jefferson's model of an 8-week legislature maybe doesn't work so well for now that we're serving 9 million people in a modern Virginia. But the budget is really all about the gap between the House and the Senate, because the majority party runs the show on appropriations. And so you've got Senate Democrats on one side and House Republicans on the other. And right now we left Richmond, they're about $3 billion apart on what they want to do. And the big difference between them is that the House Republicans want to offer more tax cuts and the Senate Democrats want to make more investments in exactly the projects that I just talked about. So more payment, more compensation for healthcare providers, more investments in school construction. The House Republicans would argue that Virginia is flush with cash, that we are now running an excess surplus, and that is a sign that Virginians are overtaxed, and we need to send that money back to Virginians. I'm of the mind that you can't call it a surplus when you haven't been paying your bills on the essentials, and we haven't. I mean, I don't think we have a $13 billion surplus when we're 25 billion in the hole on school construction. Government doesn't exist to turn a profit. It's there to provide essential services. And we can talk about what those are, but I think schools and healthcare are non-negotiable. Everybody deserves a quality education in Virginia, and everybody deserves healthcare when they need it. And right now we're not making good on that. And those are the two biggest things that the state does with its budget. So I think the case that we have a lot of money to give back is overstated. Let me tell you how they want to give it back in fairness, just so you can decide what you want more. If you want more teachers and schools, or if you want more tax rebates. The three biggest things that are on the docket are sales taxes, gas taxes, and then the standard deduction. The sales tax piece is something where there is meaningful agreement across the parties. Both Democrats and Republicans agree that Virginia should stop levying a sales tax on groceries. It's the most regressive tax that we have. It hurts working families the hardest. We are one of just 13 states who still does that. And so we would much rather stop levying taxes on essential food. That costs about $2.5 billion all told a year. And we've come around to agree on that. Where we're still pretty far apart is on gas taxes and on the standard deduction. The governor, as I'm sure you heard, wanted to pause a 5-cent increase on the gas tax for a year, and has since doubled up on that, and now wants to repeal the gas tax entirely for 3 months. I think the reason that Democrats are really wary about that is that, one, all that money goes to transportation, and y'all's roads are pretty good around here. I don't know if there's spots I didn't see on my way in, but there's a lot of spots in Virginia where that's not the case, where we're behind on road maintenance, and in particular on public transit, which is really important in a lot of communities for making sure everybody can get to work in a timely way, and for winding down our reliance on fossil fuels together. And so we think that money has a meaningful place to go. And what we're worried about is that if you cut gas taxes, since that tax is levied on the gas distributors, not at the sale at the pump, it's not clear that money gets passed on to consumers. It's up to the gas distributor whether they want to lower their price, or if they want to take this higher price time and sort of ride it out. And so that's where we're really invested in ensuring that Virginia is making the most of our price gouging laws right now, and making sure that the oil companies, which are making record profits, are not taking this as a time to line their pockets, and repealing the gas taxes is basically a big way to blow a hole in our budget without putting much money back in people's pockets. That's why we think it's sort of an ill-considered proposal. And then the last piece is the standard deduction. Which again has some merit to it in that it means bigger tax cuts for people who don't itemize, their taxes, which is a good thing. Virginia's got a very upside down tax code where the lowest earners pay the highest share of their income and the highest earners pay the least. And we'd all like to get back to something that's more level or something that's more progressive. But increasing the standard deduction, they want to double the standard deduction permanently. That would be another $2 billion a year, which ballpark is how far behind we are on the standards of quality for education. And what the Democrats have proposed instead is making our earned income tax credit refundable, which would send money back to the lowest earners to working families, but not offer that tax cut to the highest earning Virginians. The earned income tax credit refund proposal is only about $500 million. So it's a much more fiscally responsible investment that goes targeted to the people who need it most. You know, when it comes time to balance a budget, that's where my values lie. About y'all. And so that's sort of where we are. That's how you come up with $3 billion. It's about the sales tax, and it's about the standard deduction. It's about the gas tax.
When do you think you're going back?
Ooh, you know, what's interesting is that these days, you don't have to physically be there to strike a budget deal. I mean, it happens over Zoom and over the phone, and it's in the hands, the final negotiations are in the hands of the budget conferees, which is 11 people. So you don't need all 140 of us sitting on Capitol Square to strike a budget deal. You need those 11 people to get in a room and make some hard decisions. And that's why we thought that it was silly that we went back on Monday. Is, you know, we went back, we gavelled in, we took some pictures with some dogs, and because they also passed some bills on animal rights, and we all went home. And it's I don't know. I mean, the governor, yeah, you know, the governor likes making a show of things, and doesn't really know how the gears turn in Richmond, and doesn't seem to much care. So.
Some questions?
Well, I have questions on a couple of areas, both education and elections. So I'm actually on the leadership of the Virginia Electoral Board Association.
Oh, wonderful.
And we are very interested in the ranked choice voting concept. And but we have a couple of concerns. The first one is, well, the whole certification process, which is complicated, but and I want to ask you this, especially because you're a statistician and I don't understand statistics, as I call it, very well. But how do you do a risk limiting audit on a ranked choice voting?
Excellent. So just to make sure, does everybody know what ranked choice voting is? Are we good? Ish? Okay. So let me just invite everybody into the conversation and then answer your question. A ranked choice ballot is one where you don't just vote for one candidate, you get to rank the candidates in the order that you like them. And I think we all know what it feels like to go into the ballot box when there's more than 2 people on the ballot, and to have to make that awful choice between voting for the candidate that you really like and voting for somebody who you think has a chance of winning. And ranked choice voting solves that problem. When there's more than 2 people on the ballot, you don't have to just pick one. You get to rank them in the order that you like. And then when all the ballots are cast, you conduct an instant runoff to find the person who actually has the most votes. In that sense, it makes voting less like gambling. You know, you're not guessing who other people like, you're telling them who you like. I like that because I think it brings more of what we need most in politics, which I think is both unity and honesty. We can both bring coalitions together while still letting everybody be honest about who they really support and what they stand for. And I think that's a really good thing for democracy. That's why one of the first bills that I carried when I was sworn in 3 years ago was a bill that will bring ranked choice voting to Virginia for the first time and authorizes cities and counties to use it in their local elections. Richmond City is poised to be the first adopter. Their city council is introducing an ordinance later this month. And there are other communities across Virginia that are eager to follow their lead. So that brings us to 2 technical questions about the implementation. The first is about certifying the software that does the counting, because depending on which election machines your locality has, and which company makes them, you may need additional software to actually tabulate the votes. And so that process is moving forward. Actually, next week, I am having a meeting with Jim Nix from FIBA and with Richmond City and their registrar's office, and with the
Arlington.
Not with Arlington, with the woman, and I'm now in this moment forgetting her name, at Elect, who former Commissioner Piper had identified as the policy advisor who was going to carry on with this.
Rachel,
what's her last name?
Lawless.
That's right, Rachel Lawless, thank you. So we're going to get together with her, and she doesn't know this yet. But the next email I have to write is actually to her to schedule this, so that we can get going on that process, because it is a long-ish process.
Yes.
Certification, and since Richmond is poised to roll out in 2023, if we start that process this year, then we should be in good shape if we were to stay on the Richmond timeline. So that's our goal there. And then on the risk limiting audit bit, I'm afraid that I am not the person who can give you a great answer to that question. But I know the guy at the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, the attorney Chris Hughes, who is deep in the weeds on this, and I would be very happy to get you connected, because I've heard him talk about how it's similar enough to the usual system, but has some ranked choice wrinkles. But I would be very happy to put you two in
It
touch.
seems like
and
it
get
would
it.
require pulling more ballots.
I think that's right. I think that's right. Just because the dimension of information that you're trying to check is
Yeah, I would like to get his name.
yeah, absolutely. But it's the right question. A risk limiting audit is one way of checking that the count worked afterwards. You take, instead of counting all the ballots, you take a random sample, but how big that sample needs to be depends on what kind of election you're running.
So in some places, they're doing ranked choice voting for primaries that are multi-party. So that, and what that does is it eliminates the possibility of a small group taking control of their party.
Yeah, so there are two models of ranked choice that are starting to bubble up around the country. One is the model that emerged in Maine, which used ranked choice to elect their mayor in Portland for about a decade before they adopted ranked choice at the federal level in 2018. So they've been electing their members of Congress and members of Congress since 2018, and then president since 2020. And Mainers have a very strong independent streak. And what they have done is add ranked choice to partisan primaries and general elections. So Democrats go to the polls in the primary, like we might have done last year with 5 candidates on the ballot, and you choose the Democrat who you want to represent you. So, there would have been McAuliffe and McClellan and Carol Foy and Fairfax and Carter on the ballot, and you would have ranked those 5 people. And that's the main model. What Alaska is doing, but hasn't rolled out yet, I think they're rolling out this year for the first time, is a model where you have a primary that is nonpartisan in the spring, so that everybody, Democrat and Republican and independent, runs against each other in what you call a jungle primary, because it's got kind of chaos to it. And everybody only votes for one person, but the top 5 people from that advance to a general election, which is ranked choice. So then you have 5 people potentially from both parties. I confess I'm not a fan of that model. If I have to choose, I would prefer that to what we do now, because I do think there is value in primaries among people who share a set of values, and what they're describing is what they think the best way to get there is. That's the nice thing about a partisan primary. It's without ranked choice. In a world where there's no ranked choice, I would prefer that. But my preference is a ranked choice partisan primary and a ranked choice general.
So you think that takes care of the problem of a intense subgroup taking over the political party?
Yeah,
is happening somewhere.
I do, because if they're doing that and there's a ranked choice general and that's unpopular with the electorate, they'll lose in the general. But what I like about having a ranked choice Democratic primary is we get to take for granted that everybody in that race believes in public education, does not support discrimination, and then we get to talk about what's the right way to get there. And you need enough shared values to have those focused conversations about policy. We all want a fair criminal justice system. So how do we do that? I think that in a jungle primary where you can't even take those values for granted, the quality of the conversation that you can have is collateral damage. And what I've really appreciated by watching ranked choice rolled out at the municipal level around the country, whether it's in St. Paul, Minnesota or Santa Fe, New Mexico, is that every single one of those cities reports back that both the tenor of the campaign trail improved and the substance got so much deeper, because you couldn't win by being a mudslinger, because you're playing for everybody's vote. Even if I'm not your first choice, I'm trying to be your second or your third. And so I can't go around trashing your one true love, right? Because so that disciplines everybody, which is, my colleagues need discipline. And then when you can't do that, then you got to get down to the good stuff. And I appreciate that. Thank you. There's literally nothing I'm more excited about than ranked choice voting. So I can talk about it.
Well, so why did your bill not pass this time?
Republicans?
Well, because, well, I think 5 years ago, Delegate Freitas introduced the ranked choice voting bill.
He did. So this is one of those unfortunate times where the leadership of the party, especially on their side, tells folks to fall in line. And so even though there would have been enough votes with 48 Democrats and the handful of Republicans who support as well, had it to pass if it had been on the floor. But it's one of those bills like restoration of rights. It got killed in committee, which is frustrating because this is a nonpartisan issue. Utah is a state that is conservative leaning and is rolling out ranked choice all over the place. I think they have 25 cities that have adopted at this point. It's not something that's got a red team, blue team to it, but at least in Richmond, we've still got some folks who are.
Do you know what their objection is?
I think lots of politicians are scared of competitive elections.
So you mentioned restoration of rights. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I think that is one of those frustrating measures that is stuck until Democrats win back the House, because it doesn't have support from House leadership. And that means they're stuck. That bill has enough votes to pass on the floor. There are at least 3 or 4 Republicans who in their heart of hearts support it. But they fall in line as a team. And so it's stuck until the speaker likes it enough. And, I know what that's like. I was one of the Democrats who broke with my party to support the redistricting amendment, because I sincerely believe that we need districts that ignore where incumbents live. And when Democratic House leadership was sitting on that bill and didn't want to bring it to the floor, the handful of House Democrats who deeply cared about that democracy reform made a lot of noise and said, no, I want to cast that vote and you need to let me. And that's just not something I think that wing of their party is willing to do.
How did you end up in the redistricting? I didn't look.
It's funny. My district was already one of the most coherent districts in Virginia, because I live smack dab in the middle of a circular city in the middle of a square county. And so my district already started out just like this. And I think I lost one precinct and picked up another. Monticello is now in my district. But yeah, other than that.
So where are you on whether delegates should run this year or not?
I don't get a vote on that. Right, so I'll run whenever they want me to. I think
do you think it's going to happen or not going to happen? Or?
I think unless you're having pillow talk with that judge, I don't think anybody knows. But here's what I'll say. The maps we've been living under for the last decade were an affront to democracy. And the sooner we get rid of them, the better, as far as I'm concerned, because there are too many delegates who don't feel any connection to the people they serve. And how can you blame them? Because they live 2 hours away. And so I think Virginia's democracy will be better off the sooner we get to these maps that actually make some geographic sense. But I don't have any influence over that process. So I'm just sitting back and waiting like the rest of you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I get weekly emails from Free Deeds. I've been supporting him for years. But according to his statistics on his gas tax, the 24% normally of the gas taxes paid is people driving through, out-of-staters. During the summertime, it's 40%. Now, what chance do we have of getting the legislature to kill that thought of eliminating the gas tax for 3 months?
The Senate Democrats say it's a non-starter. And so at this point, the question is who's going to blink? Yeah, but you're right. It's a lot of the money gets paid by people passing through, by truckers too. It gets paid by trucking industry and summertime travelers. And a lot of it gets just soaked up as a little bit of sweetener for the distributors, and it doesn't wind up in our pockets. So the question will be, I mean, the sides are $3 billion apart. You add the gas tax repeal, now they're $3.5 billion apart, and they're going to have to meet in the middle somewhere. And I think that all things considered, in the biggest picture, I hope that the piece that they hold out on is the standard deduction, because that's the one that blows a permanent hole in the budget and would put us far behind on catching up on where we need to be in funding qualified teachers and quality medical care. So that's the one where I hope the Senate Democrats are digging in their heels.
Yeah, one more question, anyone? Or
I will.
Right, Joanna.
I won't take up all the time, but so I was a teacher in Charlottesville for 32 years.
Where did you teach?
I taught for a Piedmont Regional Education Program, and I was a traveling teacher, and I went to all the schools. I adapted physical education. I taught to special ed students. But I was going to mention, when I started in the 70s, it was a regional program, and at that point, the special ed laws had just come in. And so there was a lot of low incidence special ed students. Mm-hmm. So what happened is several localities joined together to create this regional program to provide like occupational therapy, physical therapy, vision services, the various, to all the localities, so that they didn't have to each hire a person to provide that. So I was just wondering if that model might work for what you're talking about. You were talking about localities maybe getting together and
Localities getting together on which?
You said something about localities getting together for like infrastructure maybe, or I can't remember what it was. Infrastructure. I thought you said something about that. But
on school construction.
Yeah, school construction, and
I think I think they're very politically aligned on school construction. I think unlike traveling personnel, I think the schools are gonna have to be more stuck. But it's school construction is something that happens in generational waves, because somebody finally gets up the gumption to make the investment, and then you play catch up, and then a few decades later it's like that is now your problem again. And I think that we just have it hasn't been since Mark Warner that we've had a governor that was really willing to play hardball on the budget and say, hey, we need some structural reform to our finances so we can make good on our obligations. And I'm sorry, but this governor barely knows what government does at this point, let alone how to fix it. They're just still, finding the light switch in their offices. And it's really challenging to when the secretaries came by the committees. Like I serve on the Finance and Health Committee, and so we got to interview both the new finance secretary and the new secretary of HHS. And you ask them what you think of as the basic questions about, where do you stand on the lay of the land, and didn't get back substantive answers. So it's frustrating. Yes, ma'am.
With all the recent publicity with the fire and the school enrichment, is there no one really taking advantage of that publicity to try to push construction as far as schools?
I think that the person most deeply affected by that in the legislature was already doing the most, and that was Senator McClellan, because her kids went to that school. She has a Fox Elementary kiddo, and so she has been the tip of the spear on this project and is continuing to build that coalition. And she's working with everybody from every corner of Virginia and every political stripe. And the problem is not the Senate. The Senate is deeply bipartisan on this. The problem is the House. Actually, I'm sorry, the problem is your delegate. We have a handful of members of the House who have this red line around no new taxes, no matter for what. We had a little bitty bill that I was carrying that was just about allowing Charlottesville City to temporarily add a 1% sales tax on everything but groceries for the explicit purpose of financing the renovation of our middle school. Like, this thing would appear for 5 years. The city would pay a slightly higher sales tax for a little while we're renovating the middle school. We'd pay off that bond and then we'd move on. There are 9 or so, I forget how many localities that already have this authority, mostly in Southside. There was another delegate, Jim Edmonds, who was carrying one of these for Prince Edward, and Tommy Norman in the Senate was carrying one for Isle of Wight. And these bills passed the Senate with bipartisan support. They said, if y'all want to raise your own taxes to build your own school, that's kind of your business. And they died in a tiny little subcommittee on which your delegate serves, because they have just decided that it's no new taxes, even if they're not mine. So it's frustrating. And gosh, I remember that subcommittee because I happened to serve on it, one of the few Democrats on that subcommittee. And there's a pair of little girls from Prince Edward who came and testified about how the roof leaks in their classroom. And the mayor testified, and the members of their local government, all folks stood up and said, please, this is the form of revenue that we have to invest in the school that desperately needs repair. And a handful of Republican delegates who don't live there said, no, you can't, because it doesn't align with my ideology that I take back to my YouTubers, I guess. It's a deeply frustrating thing. Yes.
How do you do your job after that?
The good thing about Richmond is there's always a next meeting. And so there is, there's something to go on to.
In a pub.
Well, I applaud you.
I
You are
appreciate it.
so incisively clear. And I think politics is so muddled, and I'm just so glad that you're in it. The first time I heard you speak, I just said, wow.
Oh, that's very
This
kind
is
of
the
you.
kind of person we need at the top.
That's very kind of you.
You should look to your salary.
I'm not going.
Thank you so much for coming out here. We appreciate it.